Yeah.
Hey, I'm Dave March, and welcome to Land of Confusion.
Hi, I'm Don Tillman over here in California. Hi.
And today we're speaking to Ricochet's own Hank Racette. Did I get that right?
You got that right. Good job.
Cool. So we were just exchanging.
We have a running theme about mispronouncing people's names. So
yes, well, Sisyphus was a bit of a mouthful last time, but yeah.
Not really a name. He just picked that to confuse.
Okay, so normally we were just exchanging hometown locations or current locations. So Hank's coming from us from just across an hour south of Montreal, so on the other end of the Lake Ontario from me. And yeah, so why don't I just start off?
And I'm in Silicon Valley as usual.
Yep. And I'll just ask the usual standard question. So where were you born and what was it like growing up there?
I was born about 10 miles from where I am right now, which is way upstate New York on the edge of Lake Champlain and the Adirondack Wilderness. And it was good. I mean, I was a kid. It's 160 days of gloom up here typically. It's we're in a pretty, we're north and we get a lot of snow, we get a lot of cold. It's a very wooded, lake-filled country. It's great to be outside in if you're a kid. Old people get tired of it pretty fast and move south. And, I haven't done that yet, but that may happen. But I've lived all over. This is where I'm back here for the last 10 years.
Okay, cool. Next one. Why did you become a conservative, and when did you realize you weren't like all the other kids?
Well, I don't know. I knew you were going to ask that because you thoughtfully sent me your list of questions. I know when I became a conservative, when I knew I was a conservative was when I read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and became an obnoxious libertarian, which is redundant. But,
been there.
Well, that's the way it worked. I was apolitical. I was a science geek all through school. Excuse my dog.
Yeah, that's okay.
We'll edit that out. I was a nerdy science kid all through grade school and high school. Apolitical, just didn't care. In college, one day in the college bookstore, just about the time they asked me to stop attending because I wasn't going to class, I discovered Atlas Shrugged, never heard of it, read it, became an instant objectivist, and for the next 10 years was an insufferable young libertarian. And then, this is a soapbox issue for me, one day I was sitting in my apartment in Cleveland and online in CompuServe, so it would have been about 1990. I was in a CompuServe doing the same exact thing I do today. I was writing some long discourse on CompuServe. And it occurred to me that I was a libertarian and we believe everything's property, right? Personal property. And I thought animals aren't quite the same as everything else because animals suffer. Animals can suffer. And so they're not the same as a brick. So I suggested on the CompuServe Libertarian Forum that maybe we did a separate category of property for things that can suffer, that have limited rights not to be arbitrarily tormented. And the blowback was incredible. It was as if I had suggested becoming socialist. It was weird. And that's when I figured out that libertarians probably didn't really have a very commonsensical approach to things, and maybe I should reevaluate. And it was then I decided I was a conservative, really.
Yeah, I'll mention one little comment on Atlas Shrugged. My girlfriend loves the book. She's read it multiple times. She's not a libertarian or objectivist, but she considers that her favorite romance novel.
Well, the sex scenes are interesting, and that's true of Ayn Rand, right? Yeah, and I've read everything she wrote, and I admired her for a long time. There's obviously a lot of good for conservative and libertarianism. But it occurred to me about then, 1990-ish, that libertarianism and socialism have in common this belief that people, if they only knew, would change their nature. How often have you heard a libertarian express that idea that if people just understood what freedom meant, they would become libertarian, they would embrace it? Well, people don't really want to live in a completely egalitarian, free environment. They want a hierarchy, I think. Human nature, they want to be part of a group and have some security, have other people do things for them and think things for them. So, and socialists have the same problem. They think that if people only knew, we could all convert our human nature and become something else. I don't think either's realistic. I'm a Burkean traditionalist. Just kind of a humble.
What was it? You're saying people only knew us. It's more like when they make that statement every time, and I've seen my lefty friends say it a few times. Why are people voting against their economic interest? And it's like, people make decisions, not just purely based on economics. Because if you did, you wouldn't be on the left.
Right. And I have a very different sense. I'm just going to ramble here. If you have an agenda, take over.
No, we ramble for an hour and then we end.
Oh, good. I've watched.
Hence the title of the.
I have a different sense of what conservative and liberal is, or conservative is than probably most people. I think most people look at conservative and they think there's a basket of values, a basket of goods that conservatives want. They want various kinds of restrictions. They want various kinds of standards. I think it's different than that. I think conservatives want not to have change occur around them. Conservatives are cautious about change. They're wary of change. They're traditionalists, essentially. And what you're preserving, what you're conserving, depends very much on where you are. If you're a Russian conservative of 1916, maybe you wanted things not to get radical around you. Maybe that was what you wanted. If you're radicals don't feel a great affinity for tradition, and they're happy to break things and think things will be better. I believe they really think things will be better. Mm-hmm. I think most people are conservative. Just like evolution has made most people conservative. If you're in the habit of reinventing everything all the time, you're not going to make it as a culture, probably, because most ideas are bad. So you need, Chesterton, I forget how he said it, but tradition's the way the dead have a say in the democratic process, essentially. It's the continuing voice. And I think that's right. Tradition's really important. I think most of us are conservative. So libertarianism is radical, socialism is radical, and I don't like radical.
David, you mentioned the voting against one's best interest, and that is a sore spot for me, because that is a Democratic Party line. They talk about people would if they vote Republican, they're voting against their own best interest, with a suggestion that you're not smart enough to vote in your best interest. And excuse me, if I cough. Edit that out later. And at the same time, they should be able to win any election just by offering lots of free stuff, because then people will not be voting against their best interest. And I think that it's a remarkable strategy to use. And they're saying, vote for us, we'll give you free stuff, and you're stupid if you don't vote in your best interests. And these are the same folks that have, run cities like Detroit for 60 years.
Yep. I remember watching something. It was Jonathan Haidt was doing a thing with the former leader of the Liberal Dems in Britain. Liberal Dem leader said that, and Jonathan Haidt's like, whoa! You don't know what these guys' interests are. You can't say that. What you just think you think they're going to make a decision purely based on maybe money. People do not make decisions based on that. That was one of the big mistakes of the Remain camp in Brexit, is when they went out and said, if you do this, if you vote to leave, you're going to lose a certain amount of money. And then the people are like, okay, we're willing to take the economic hit. Now what's your argument? And they had nothing else. They only made a purely financial argument, and they never sold people on like the benefits of staying in the EU, because really there wasn't much that benefited the people. It's like, we don't get the ability to control our regulation and all these things, or the benefits of common market, because the EU common market is very closed unless you're in the EU. And so like, I want to get cheap grain from Africa. I can't do it because I have to buy expensive stuff from France. Well, getting off the topic, but I'm just.
No, it's a good point. It's a technocratic conceit to this your own interest argument, because we hear it in the case of minimum wage. We've been told that employers will benefit because there'll be less turnover and less training required. They don't say, but the corollary of that is there'll be fewer entry-level jobs, which is implied by people not leaving entry-level jobs. But we're told it's in the employer's best interest, actually, to pay higher. But employers don't know that. We're told in the case of climate, it's in our best interest to create alternative energy sources, right? It's going to, how often have you heard it's going to pay off if we make this transition? Well, it's not going to pay off. It's extraordinarily expensive. And if there was any hope of it paying off, it'd have paid off, or we'd be, on our way commercially to doing it. It's not it's, they often do it. It's we know better and we're willing for your own good to change. And that's the mantra of the left, I guess.
Yeah, pretty good. My next question was on the list is, what do you think is the most important part of being a conservative? Just the fact that we're preserving stuff, or?
I'm not sure how to understand. You mean the most important thing to do as a conservative?
Well, yeah. What do you think?
What's valuable about it? I'm going to interpret it that way. Why is it good that we're conservatives? And I do believe it's good. Is because back to that survival thing. I think most ideas are bad. Most experiments fail. You go into a laboratory and it's like Edison inventing the light bulb, right? You don't knock out the perfect solution the first time, or even a workable solution the first time. You did, our labs would all be OEMs. They'd be cranking out products, right? But no, it's an experimental process. You have to invest in it. The same is true of culture. You don't invent traditional marriage or any other structure, property rights, all those things that we take for granted didn't get invented instantly by some genius founder saying, let's do it that way. It's an evolved thing. Conservatives are people who are, the word humble, which I don't usually, but they have the humility to accept that they're not as smart as everybody who came before. That's the big thing to me. And I think most people I think are conservative. It's become safe not to be. And I don't think there are any villains in this piece, really. I think there are bad people, but I don't think there's villains in the broad conservative radical movement. I think what happened was after World War II, we became fabulously successful, wealthy, secure. Our children grew up, people like me, at the end of the baby boom grew up, safe and secure. It was easy. And it was okay to take chances. It was okay to take on big debt. It was okay to live a non-conventional life by old standards, because nothing bad ever really happened. And we become inured to novelty. And the bad consequence of that is that now we have crazy people running around telling us that there are 57 sexes and everything is a marriage and you can marry anything, and socialism works. And that's what you end up with if every choice is safe. So my take on it. So what do you think is the most important thing about being conservative?
I think you're right about being kind of like the traditionalism and such a preserving thing. I think of everything that we talk about, it's kind of a yin-yang duality between liberals and conservatives. Like if we didn't have liberals, we would never gotten on the boat to get here. Columbus doesn't sail around the world because he's a conservative. Like we need these guys to do that, but we need conservatives to say, we need to be careful when we get there. We need to be careful. We're the brake on craziness.
Yes, it's we need a few radicals. I always think of like a medieval village or something even earlier, agrarian society. They know how to shock the wheat, how to stack it so the rain doesn't rot it. And once every blue moon, some stranger sails through town and he has a different idea. And if you listen to the stranger who comes with no references, and you listen to him and you do it that way, you might lose everything. If you listen to his idea, if you embrace his radical idea, you might lose everything. But somebody tries it. Somebody who's more insensitive to radicalism gives it a shot and it works and things improve. If everybody did that and it didn't work, then they don't make it through the winter. And so I think that's the nature of it. Most people are conservative. Most people should be conservative. We need a few radicals. We don't want to be too comfortable about it.
I have a slightly different approach, the way I think about it. I've decided, I guess recently, that the liberal conservative lefty righty thing is kind of irrelevant. And what is relevant is the amount of authoritarian control government has, and that the lefty ideology is there just as a setup to grab the power.
Mm.
And it's just the excuse to get the power. And perhaps I've become more of a cynic, but perhaps this is cynicism. But it seems the way that the left does not have any kind of ideological foundational base that their positions can be traced to, and more like power. Increase the power of the government your group has. That includes, bureaucracy, regulations, opportunities for graft, and so forth. That sort of thing trumps any kind of ideological position. And that's that's kind of a strange thing to say. That the ideology doesn't matter so much if there's power and money involved.
There's a lot of different actors, right? A lot of different forces. The liberal radicalism, as I call it, because it just means the people who want change. They have a lot of different directions they can go, but everything they're doing is positive in the sense of wanting to impose something on the established order. Conservatives are negative in that sense. Which is why it's so boring to be a conservative, right? It's why we don't have the good chants, we don't have the good riots, we don't have the good signs, we don't have the babes go for the liberal guys, because conservatives have all they're saying really is standing at the wall shouting stop, right? That's they just slow down. They're just wary, whereas the liberals have all sorts of great ideas. Radicals want to create a minimum wage, they want to create a guaranteed income, they want socialized medicine, they want to radically change the environmental policies, they want to create new programs. Right. They're full of great ideas, and some of them I'm sure are sincere. Some of them I'm sure are absolutely believers in what they advocate. The Democratic,
right. And I think against something like that, we as a group sort of have to say, okay, first fix what you broke, then try this, and that will generally stop them because they can't fix what they broke, right?
No, and it's really hard because we've stopped educating children. I mean, unfortunately, we stopped teaching anything about America a few decades ago, and if you don't have a sense that what we had worked and worked brilliantly, then you don't feel good defending it. They've managed to pull out the supports, the 1619 project, things like that, making it impossible to be patriotically pro-American without feeling a little bit like you're a simpleton.
Yeah, I've had several arguments with people over the year. More recent, I started as a historian. I started a few years ago, really learning about revolutionaries and revolutions via like the Revolutions podcast and just going through all that. And I just look at what they're saying and doing, and I'm like, I've seen this before. You're white. I'm a white allied person. I'm like, well, first off, what? Before I get down the rabbit hole of the revolutions, it's just like, why are you saying that? Can't they just tell you're a white person? You're here to help. You don't need to tell them to come up with a self-descriptor for them. But your self-descriptor is no different than when the communists called each other comrade and the French revolutionaries all called each other citizen. You're just using the same thieves' cant and you're reinventing it with new terms. And come up with something original, maybe. I thought you were liberals.
How often do the revolutions work to anyone's advantage? I mean, what's the
the one thing I learned really about listening to that podcast, most of the revolutions fail.
They do.
They fail hard. It's like 99 out of 100 revolutions are crushed, and all the kids are sent off to the re-education camps by the conservative elders.
Right. And if what you started with was horrible, if you started with a brutal dictatorship and you had a revolution and it failed, in the sense of didn't create a good society, at least you don't have the horrible dictatorship anymore.
Yeah.
In America today, we've got a pretty terrific society, and we aren't likely to benefit from a revolution.
Yeah, usually when you get the real crazy, it's via crop failure. That's the one that seems to be the key turning. When you can't afford to feed yourself, that's when it goes crazy. French Revolution, Russian Revolution, like those are the two. That's what happens.
So how many revolutions are we talking about here?
I
never thought of counting them.
It's hard to say. I'd say at least 100. Because they're not really revolutions, because they're rebellions that fail, right? So you go looking, like people talk about all these communist revolutions that happened, and I had a talk with a friend of mine a few years ago, and I said, let's go through the ones that succeeded, and they're like Vietnam and Russian Revolution and a few other places. And I'm like, yeah, now let's count up all the times that someone tried to do that and failed, and it was like 3 dozen. The revolution of 1848, France is the only one that changes government. Every other government that tries to take over is eventually crushed by reactionary forces. Italy, Austria, Hungary, Germany. Russia doesn't really have that, but Russia gets a whole lot of crazy stuff happening later in the century. But like 1848, it reminds me a lot of the Arab Spring, where, you know, I believe it's Morocco. Tunis is the only one that has a revolution that succeeds, and they get rid of all the corrupt guys. Same with France; they get rid of all their corrupt guys and bring in a more moderate part of the monarchy comes to power, and then they're kicked out another 20 years later, and the same thing happened. And then every other city, they have a brief liberalization, relaxing, they get rid of some of the old guard, and then within like a year or two, they're all dead or crushed.
So it's really like that Rocky and Bullwinkle thing. Like that trick never works.
Yeah.
Right.
Almost, and that gets back to what's so important about being a conservative today. It worked in America. And it worked brilliantly in America, and I'm really skeptical that that can happen again because of communication. I mean, I just don't think you can think about what happened in 1776, roughly. We had people who were deeply thoughtful and well-educated, classically educated, sitting down in isolation without the constant feedback of everybody else in the world with an interest in it, telling them what to do. And they created something. And today you would have every corner of the country and the world informing them, judging them, directing, compromising. I don't think we could do it again, which makes preserving what we have all that much more important.
I think the British would have stopped the revolution if they had just given you guys seats in Parliament.
Well, that sort of thing. And, you know, we've got the Statue of Liberty and the icon of America as a beacon, but we are. And I think we are the last one, at least in foreseeable future. And it really is the world needs us not to win. Big deal.
But you were talking earlier about wealth and how we're able to indulge in all these craziness that's happening. I remember having a birthday party here this last Saturday. We're only allowed to have maybe 10 people in our house. So, and it's who was willing to brave it. So we had 9, but 2 of my friends who are women, they sat there and they had this conversation. I went in the other room because it was about intersectionality and gender disparity and gender fluidity. And I'm like, before I left, I'm thinking like, we must be a really rich society where we can indulge in this frivolity. Like,
yeah.
And I think we're not going to be very much rich for very much longer, because I think our response to the pandemic is we're blowing all our money to save a very small percentage of people.
There's the debt cliff, and nobody knows what that's going to do. And it'll happen quickly or slowly or not at all. I mean, I thought as a libertarian in 1980, I thought we're doomed. We can't possibly be the kind of debt we're looking at right now. I figured by the end of the decade, it'd be over. And I was completely.
Well, I think we've spent so much money, and we're going to hit real inflation, which we haven't seen since the 70s and early 80s.
Sooner. I thought we'd have hit that years ago, actually. 0% essentially for how long on the Federal Reserve lending? I mean, it's.
Well, I think what we need is to institute a mechanism of incentive for less spending. Right now, there's no incentive to spend less in Congress. right? He gets, wee, free money, and and infinite supply. So to do that, one of the things I proposed was that we adopt a rule that members of Congress can only be reelected in a year where the budget is balanced. And that's kind of nice because you don't have by law require the budget to be balanced, which would leave you in trouble in case of an emergency, right? And this will have a natural effect of whittling away the congressman.
So basically, you'd have to prevent everyone who has institutional memory from doing that. The French revolutionaries tried something similar to that. The first group of people came in, they passed laws, and then they passed a thing saying they could not rerun again. And the next generation of guys that came in were really crazy and radical, and they killed a lot of those guys from the first round. Like dead. So that's
we've got the worst of both. We have the crazies, and we have the guys who've been in Congress for 60 years. We got them.
I'd rather have the guys in Congress for 60 years. At least they're predictable.
But I mean, it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a full-time career. It's supposed to be you're supposed to represent the regular populace, and then go back to the regular life.
I have no idea how to fix it. And nobody knows how to fix it. Obviously, they're not going to pass such legislation. So,
but it would be great. It would. I mean, it would kill two birds with one stone.
It'd be nice.
Of course, they're the ones that would have to pass it, right? Yeah. And that's not going to happen.
Now, you guys, we're talking about debt cliff. That happened actually here in Canada in the early 90s, where we actually ran out of the ability to spend money. Yeah. And the result was 5 years of no deficits. They had to balance the budget. Brought in a massive austerity program. My father, who said that it was the liberal government at the time, was probably the most fiscally conservative government we've had since the 19th century. And they cut spending across the board by 40%. 40% on defense, healthcare, welfare spending, all these things. They downloaded a lot of stuff to the provinces, who then downloaded it to municipalities, and then finally ran out of people to download to. But there was just that led to until 2015, when the Liberals came back, it was a broad consensus of no deficit spending. But when people were in trouble, the new kids that had come up and who helped get the Liberals elected basically said, I don't care if the country goes into debt a little bit, if that means helping me out. So it can and will happen. And I think when it does, you will have when people become poor again, it'll make a difference.
That's the question, isn't it? And it's hard to imagine the world reserve currency doing that. It's one thing for Canada, no offense. It's another thing for America to go broke.
Yeah. Especially since everywhere else in the world is really unstable and is becoming more unstable in the United States, despite all the looking at it is actually going to be the safe haven capital. You're seeing
absolutely.
All this money flowing out of China getting into the United States because the Chinese billionaires can't make it any profit. They don't have a profit-driven system.
And we're not entirely sure that we can't grow our way out of our current problem. I mean, I don't know. It's enormous, but again, I thought we'd have collapsed decades ago. So I would predict Apocalypse Now, the climate change book is titled. I'm not sure that we do run out.
Yep. There's a guy called Peter Zehan. He's a geostrategist. He's got videos on the internet, and he's got some books, and he explains why America is so uniquely designed to prevent such collapses, because you have probably one of the best wealth generating systems in the world. And despite 200 years of bipartisan cooperation to destroy that, the Congress has failed to do so.
Seems like we'll have to devolve a lot of it to the states. As you said, in Canada, we'll have to push a lot of that federal burden down to the already overtaxed states. Probably could do that. Presumably, we'll do that at some point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm guessing one of the things that I don't know. I'm just going to wild guess. I'm guessing one of the things that have saved us is that the other countries are doing just as much overspending. That's a theory. I don't know. I haven't checked.
Without our wealth to begin with, yeah.
Yeah.
How we compare now, I mean, I know Greece and Ireland and Spain and all that. I don't know. But we're so much richer, though, than the rest of the world. It's hard to.
Yeah, you have the Mississippi River Valley, which is this incredibly well stretched out rivers chain, and everything that moves by floats on down those rivers is moving at 1/15 the cost of anything else. So like, I can't remember which South American country it is, but there's one where all the stuff, you have these giant favelas. I guess maybe Brazil. You have all these giant favelas and all these other things, but everything has to come down by road. And they have this giant super highway of like stuff and to get all the grain and all the stuff that's coming from the interior over the Andes and to come down into the cities where they can finally be shipped. And America doesn't have that problem. They can just move it. You guys can move it by boat.
We also have an excellent highway system. We've got a rail system for shipping.
And you have good, you have property rights and controls that are the envy of anyone else that people can just find oil in their backyards and suddenly become millionaires. In Ontario, if you find oil in your backyard, the mining company comes along, they have to pay twice whatever your property value is, but you don't get to continually rent it out.
Right. Well, we also have a lot of fossil fuel.
I will point out that California has almost no rivers, navigable rivers, almost none.
Lives in California, right? They live along the.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Look where everybody lives in California.
Yeah, on the coast. Absolutely, on the coast. And
South American-like part of America.
Right. And the only rivers we have go from the Sierras, like down to the coast. And you don't navigate up to the Sierras. No one does that. It's kind of a different situation. And the East Coast has got lots of rivers all over.
I've read two explanations for why Africa didn't develop technologically. We have better ideas now, but one is that they lack navigable waterways that would allow shipping. Another is that they lack domesticable large animals. Most of those are northern, and without having horses and without having other farm animals that we can actually use for something, they just didn't have the means to create a transport-based economy.
Yeah, except for North Africa. Well, it's really the only place where they could do that kind of thing, like Egypt and Tunis, which would have been Carthage back in the day. And then, of course, Rome decided that they didn't want too many rivals on the North African coast, so they took care of that problem.
Where great trade started, it was along the Mediterranean and that's in the Nile, I don't know.
Yeah, the only other real civilization I can think of that really developed a good system was Ethiopia/Abyssinia.
And why was that? What was that?
They had a different. They were. I think it was because the terrain was so defendable. They could preserve civilization when it fell elsewhere. So they don't have the same problems with. I mean, they still had problems, but they were able to stay in control a bit more. So they had their empire last a long time versus like the rest of. So when the Romans come in, they get civilization from the Romans. But after that, when civilization falls other places, they can preserve their Christian identity versus where the Arabs just impose Islam on everybody.
Right. So are you an armchair historian or a professional historian?
I'm armchair. I've been published in some magazines. So, but people are like, I tried looking to get in a history degree, and I don't want to do these dumb courses. Like I have no problem like writing and publishing stuff on history that I care about, but I don't want to do like to get a Canadian degree. You have to do the fundamentals of Canadian history. Like, I don't care. This is not very interesting to me. I guess I could look into getting some sort of former degree online like that, but I'm also thinking maybe I'll just get an English degree and just take a whole lot of courses I really care about.
Don, you're saying the microphone's a little soft.
You're a little soft. David's a little loud from my point of view.
Yep.
I'll try to talk up.
I don't know where I am. So.
Yep.
Okay.
It'll all even out when I run it through the video editor later.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that were another thing. So why don't we get a little back to Ricochet, and I'll ask you the Ricochet questions, and we'll get into your bio. So why did you join Ricochet?
I heard it on a podcast. I think I heard one of Rob's pitches on some podcast somewhere. I thought, boy, that sounds interesting. I've been on Facebook for a long time, and I'm still on Facebook. But I thought it'd be nice to have a more basically conservative, maybe more committed, pay as kind of audience and group to talk to. So, but as I mentioned earlier, I was on CompuServe years ago, so I've been on social media for a long time. Tried Twitter back in 2008 and abandoned it quickly. It's just way too time consuming and frenetic for my team. And now it's toxic and evil. But back then it was just too much. That was it. That's why I joined Ricochet.
Okay. And what do you
statistically, Rob's pitch is working pretty well here.
It worked that one time. I'm annoyed with Rob most of the time now because he's around, but I give vent to that occasionally. But yeah, it sounded good, and I've always liked Peter Robinson. So.
Well, if you want to get a good side of Rob, I suggest watching our interview with Gary Mcveigh, who gives us some insight into how much Rob is not quite as the left-leaning shell we think he is, or the soft rhino we think he is. He's a bit more tougher, made of tougher stuff than we think.
He's the only Ricochet guy I've actually met in real life. And he's anti-Trump. I get that. It's fine. I can understand.
A little bit.
But anyway.
Well, I'm anti-George W. Bush, so it works out.
There you go. All right.
And what do you most like about Ricochet?
The intelligence of the audience, no question, of the membership. They write well. It's a good group. I write on Facebook and on Ricochet, and I have to really be careful on Ricochet what I say. I've got a lot more latitude on Facebook. It's improved my precision. I try not to say anything that I'm going to have to take back ever. So I try to be careful. Shoot from the hip too much. And on Facebook, you can get away with a lot. I've got 900 and some people on Facebook who will let me get away with a lot. Whereas on Ricochet, I get called on things if I'm wrong. I like that. It improves me that way. I think
Okay. Well, just looking through your brief bio here, you're shy father of six kids.
I'm not shy, but I'm shy of 60. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
59. I've got 6 kids, all grown now. One daughter still at home because college was briefly canceled, but and 5 sons off in the world. So.
And you know what? I'm just looking at you see the challenge of Islam, and it's sort of like that was such a big.
Wasn't it?
Thing for the last 15 years, and suddenly, you know what? No one seems to care too much about it anymore. And
well, and I was big on that at one time. That was 3 years ago. I wrote that blurb for my profile that you're reading, and it was a big deal 3 years ago. Islam was a real threat to Western culture until Western culture ate itself, as far as I'm concerned. Now the threat to Western culture is Western culture. We've got colleges apologizing for slavery and confusing kids about their sex and telling them that socialism works. It's crazy. I mean, we've reached the point where we don't need Islam anymore to destroy the West. Is doing it, and Islam will be a problem again when we stop doing it faster than Islam was doing it. But yeah, I think Islam's an awful religion. I want to say that, right? I think Islam's a terrible religion that teaches awful stuff. And the left has that wrong too. The left has lost the ability to compare things that are different and see the difference. So they hold up Christianity and say, well, look at what Christians do around abortion clinics or the Crusades or whatever, and compare that to Islam's horrible record globally, as if systems teach the same thing, which
and Islam in the Crusades.
they've lost the ability to be discerning. I beg your pardon?
And Islam during the Crusades.
That too, yeah. You don't have to go that far back. I mean, it used to be a topic of mine. Just write the mini biography of Jesus and Muhammad. It doesn't take long. And I'm an agnostic. I'm not a religious man. But it doesn't take long to see the character difference in a faith built on a warlord versus a faith built on a pacifist martyr. That's,
But I think there's also the thing in Islam is that it's just as much, if not more, a political system, a political movement than
communism steals a
than a
lot
religion.
from Islam.
I mean, how many governments, how many nations are there with Islamic-based governments? I believe it's like 54.
Is it? Okay, well, there's 57 in the Islamic, in Obama's famous 57, in the UN's conference.
Okay, let's say 57. That's a lot. I mean, how many nations are there that are with a Christian government or with a Jewish government? Well, there's one with a Jewish government.
One was Jewish. I don't know about Ireland, maybe. I don't know. Probably not anymore now that they have abortion. I don't know. But
I remember.
But yeah, it's. I think the political side of Islam might be, depending on your metric, larger than the religious side.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, why wouldn't it be? If you think about it, I mean, Muhammad was a warlord who passed a set of laws, whereas Jesus said, according to the Bible, something to the effect of "My kingdom is not right." I mean, explicitly, render unto Caesar, let Caesar make the rules. We've got, it was a very different perspective. It explicitly denied authority as opposed to Muhammad, who claimed it.
I remember getting into an argument years ago on a board, and the guy said, I said, well, I just said something like the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and I didn't mean to. And he's like, you can't, someone came push back, you can't call it that. And I'm like, dude, it's on their website. It's called the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Like, it's...
People will say, though, and they'll always say it, that Christianity and Islam are both equally bad. It's a nonsense claim. If you value things that we take for granted, women's rights, things like that, humane, religious independent governance, secular governance, then obviously Christianity is a better choice. I mean, it doesn't. You just have to be ignorant to think otherwise. But a lot of people are ignorant, and the same is true of socialism and capitalism. The left has thrown out its discernment. There's no longer. Well, that's why Jefferson, who wrote beautiful things about liberty, is a monster in the left's judgment. We need to, soapbox time, we need to boldly reclaim common sense. That's why I wear this dumb Trump 2020, black Trump 2020 cap around town, because Trump's a jerk and he's irritating as all get out, and I campaigned against him during the primaries, but Republicans are a whole lot better than Democrats right now, and I want a Republican to win. And I don't want, this is weird, for 60 million people voted for Trump, and yet it's a crime to wear a hat or a shirt with his name on it, right? Yeah, you can't. I was in a bar one day, back before COVID, sitting in a bar drinking my Diet Coke because I don't drink when I'm out, and watching people's coats and things. And some tipsy young lady came up and started talking to me, and we had a nice conversation. And at one point I mentioned my Trump hat is in the car, and she recoiled and said, "Oh, I wouldn't have guessed you're a Trump supporter." We had a nice conversation. And what I thought was, you bozo, there's 60 million Americans. You think they're all monsters? I mean, lots of nice people voted for Trump.
Yeah.
I didn't say that, but that's what I thought, because we've allowed ourselves to be so cowed. Somebody posted somewhere on Facebook today, I think, about how most of us are more afraid of wearing a Trump hat in public than going out without a mask, or something to that effect. The stigma of acknowledging who you voted for in 2016 is, even though half the country did, is somehow overwhelming. And that's the kind of silencing I don't want. So I wear my Trump hat when I'm out in public. Even though people look at you askance and treat you like you're a monster. Anyway, that gets back to the common sense. we need to be willing. My current soapbox thing is we have to get over this willingness to let the left decide what our words mean and what things you're allowed to say.
Mm-hmm.
Political correctness, cancel culture garbage. We have for too long been unwilling to say simple truths. And that has
the emperor has no clothes.
The emperor has no clothes. Socialism doesn't work. It's a horrible system.
Mm-hmm.
There are, as far as we know, two sexes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not normal for young men to think they're girls or for young girls to think they're boys. That's not normal.
Yeah, I've told this to my friends on several occasions. I remember being like 5 or 6 years old, and I started like trying to wear my mother's high-heeled shoes and ask about dresses and trying on nail polish, and I was given like false like polish, just like a jar with some water in it. And I would be like, people are like, and I'm like, I'm one of the most like straight guys I know. But looking back on it, I realized why I was doing all this at 5 is that because they were all things my mom did, and I want to be like my mom. But I'm terrified if I did those things today, people would say, oh, he's obviously trying to be a girl and he's been born wrong. And I'm like, no. I'm just a kid. Like, so other kids wanted to be fire trucks. Do we have to make them go down the auto shop and put on car parts? Like,
we've got the violence thing. The speech is violence, silence is violence, nonsense. That the left is the current mantra, right?
Well, and anyone ever says that to me, I'm like, well, I think you have obviously come from a place of privilege, and it is my duty as someone who has experienced violence to hit you with some violence, so you know the difference between the lack of violence and violence.
There you go. That's right. I think that we make a mistake when we don't speak up, and we've gone too long politely because it's a traditional value in America to be polite. Etiquette is a thing, and we're gracious normally to people and let them say crazy things and don't rebuke them. And the left doesn't have that problem, right? The left doesn't value civility particularly. And if you go to the chat boards, you'll see the left swears an awful lot. Comments, and we don't on the right as much.
Well, I like the phrase you put together to boldly reclaim common sense. I think that's bumper sticker worthy. I think that's nice.
I think we need to speak up, and it's not, you're so ostracized now. You got to be pretty thick-skinned, and you also have to be in either a social situation or a professional situation where you can afford to speak out and not get sidelined. I'm lucky in that I don't really have a friend group or a social life, so I get to say whatever I want, and everybody knows I'm an insufferable conservative, and it works out. And my customers are all far away, and they don't have to hear me. So I'm self-employed. I haven't had an employer in forever, so I can do what I want and get away with it and say what I want and get away with it. Not everybody's so fortunate, I know.
True. What do you do for work?
I write industrial automation software. I write robotic software for the print industry mostly.
Cool.
I can let Don take over the rest of this interview, and he can
all right
about all those things because I clearly know nothing about them.
That's all right. We could geek out if you want. But
what do you do?
I'm a software engineer.
Oh, yeah. What kind of work?
I've done a lot of things. Most of it ends up being towards user interface nowadays, because that's very much in demand. So I'm
musical stuff in the background. I saw the guitars. So you've got some kind of aesthetic sense, probably, which is
mostly it comes from the original drive was that there are a lot of things going on in the electronics world that we can't see and that I'm very interested in. So data visualization is what drove me to do a lot of things. If we can, being able to just to see scientifically what's going on in a certain process, that's always fascinated me. And so doing graphing stuff and always that sort of thing has always been good. And I got into the user interface aspect a couple of years before the Macintosh, way back when, and it's a big demand for it now. I like doing it. So I'm what they call it a full stack. I think that's what they call us now.
I stop at the user interface. My favorite interface is metal, really, is motion, in control, and motors and solenoids and things like that.
Right.
All of my applications look like they were written on a IBM 360 in 1978. Displays are pretty bad. I have to do them, but everybody's accustomed to my square layout, and if I have to start picking a font or a color, it slows me way down. So. Motion control, embedded controllers, some of the electronics, that's the thing is what I do.
So you're a big fan of servo loops then, and that sort of thing.
Servos and steppers, and motion control in general, embedded controllers, discrete electronics.
Right. Now, I also have this electronics background, and with this music stuff here, I've developed a lot of expertise in audio electronics, and there we're dealing with feedback loops and responses to changes and things all the time, and it's fascinating stuff.
And I know almost nothing about that. I'm just now, after 40 years of software, I'm really just getting into the electronics. I've got on my desk all sorts of parts and I2C stuff and things that I haven't ever worked with before. I'm just now brushless DC motors. I've never dealt with them before. I'm now motor technologies now. Great, and I'm loving it. So I've never
really interesting.
I've taken on a couple small projects that involve me actually doing the electronics, and I fix buttons. I'm losing my shirt, but that's okay. I'm learning, and it's a fascinating experience. As I go.
So I think so we're seeing more combination of technologies now with robotics, with manufacturing, controllers. We have all these languages for dealing with real-time operations. It's getting really interesting again, because the hardware and software used to be separated for a while. And now they're going to be more interesting things, especially robotics. That's big.
What languages do you use when you program?
I'm sorry?
What languages do you use when you program?
JavaScript a lot now. I've been Python. I'm a big fan of Python.
Okay.
That is a very cool language, and it's just getting better and better. It's a little weird, but it's before that, I was doing a lot of Java. And I'm lucky enough to have programmed in Lisp as my...
No kidding. I've also done some Lisp.
Oh, cool. I used that as my main programming language for about 12 years, and that was a lot of fun.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty exotic. I haven't Lisp in 30 years, probably.
I actually worked for this startup out of the MIT AI lab. It was called Symbolics. They made these things called Lisp machines, which is a very high performance computer for the time that runs the language Lisp as its native instruction set, and it runs it faster than anything else. Very, very cool.
I never was good with it,
and it was just overtaken by technology.
Yeah. It's a tough language for a lot of us to wrap our heads around. Although I guess the functional people take it in stride.
Well, now it's getting functional programming is really big now.
Are you into that? Because I find it impenetrable. I've got a son who's a wizard at it, and I can't get my head around it.
Since with Lisp background, I've been doing that for a long time.
I'm C++ all the way. That's my thing.
Okay. It's neat. Functional programming has really taken off. In the UI world, in JavaScript and everything, we're getting way too geeky, aren't we?
I talked a lot during the first half of the show. I figured you guys could get a chance to talk about stuff too.
The JavaScript language was originally just a very simple language for tweaking up web pages.
I remember that. I didn't think it then. I remember that.
Yeah, and I was actually at Netscape when Brendan Eich invented the language.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember he said, I looked at the language and said, it's kind of interesting, a little weird, kind of interesting though, I see. And it was originally used to validate forms on a web page, make sure the code has the right number of digits and so forth. And I said, that's an interesting language, but I never want to do serious computing in that. I never want to do a Fourier transform in that, right? Of course, now I'm doing Fourier transforms in JavaScript.
It's astounding, yeah.
And the language has just grown and embraced all these, a lot of functional programming, and people are just going after it because it's very descriptive and weird. It is weird.
Right. Well, the ethos in the UI world, in that end of the stack, or that top of the stack, is fast prototyping, get it done and get it out. And
yes.
Python is after that. The loosely typed or flexibly typed, whatever you want to call it, languages, binding, are great for that. I'm at the other end. I get stuck in metal and shipped, and we don't want it to do anything surprising, so we want as much caught up front as possible, and that's why I like C++ and C and things like that. I'm really uncomfortable with JavaScript. JavaScript and Python both leave me a little wary of data types and binding and things.
Oh yeah, and Lisp had that up the wazoo. So yeah,
that's right. I like very deterministic things that I can static check up front. Anyway. Sorry to take that.
So that's our little nerd fest right there.
Yeah, I'll be sure to add it in the description at the end. Like,
we can come back. The one thing about JavaScript I find really interesting is that the language is changing so quickly, and faster. It's growing. It's adding features faster than anything I've ever seen before. And the reason is they invented this way to change the language and throw in little updaters into the web page, because it only runs, JavaScript only runs in a web page,
right?
Theoretically. And so they put in these little updaters that can update the language on the fly. It's very interesting stuff.
Sorry, I just imagine shipping a machine to Brazil with that in it, and
Now, you wouldn't want it for embedded stuff, no.
No, I think not, probably. I have enough problem with Windows updates.
Yeah. Okay, we're done with the thing. We're running low on the time there. And so.
Yeah, that's okay.
From ourselves.
Yeah, so let me see if I can go a little bit more on something that we were talking about earlier. We were talking about it. So we'll just get back to you're a climate empiricist. You have yet to see any evidence that you think that we're in any trouble, I guess.
Well, yeah, and that I wrote that 3 years ago. I think the evidence that we're changing the climate's probably a little stronger now. I'm very much in the Lombard school of prioritizing. I absolutely believe that we can fix the problems more readily than we can prevent them. It makes sense to wait until we're a richer world and know what the problems are. I'm a real skeptic of economic projection. I think it's insane to think that we can project complex systems 80 years down the road. To disrupt the economy today.
Right. My own opinion is that it doesn't matter, because all the things we've tried to do to make the climate better to have screwed up and gone the other way. Everything we've done, right? The carpool lanes that actually slow down traffic and cause more congestion and waste more fuel and create more exhaust, or that MTBE additive that ended up polluting the groundwater, or every one of these, as the biofuels that cause more pollution, the corn ethanol that.
What was it? The light bulbs that they had there before they discovered LEDs, where they mandated we had to replace all the old light bulbs with these ones that, if they break, you have to basically call in a chemical squad to.
Right. So every one of these has failed massively. Oh yeah, and then the corn ethanol, which messes with the food supply as a side effect of draining that enormous aquifer in the Midwest. So, I mean, all of this is going horribly bad. And again, no one's fixing it up, although the MTBE was mostly fixed up for billions of dollars. But yeah, it's every one of these, even the cars for clunkers program, Cash for Clunkers
Mm-hmm.
program, had a side effect of they had to destroy the engine of a car to take it out of use. And it's unfortunate because cars, like the most repurposed and recycled products ever created,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's
Just look
sold
at
multiple
Cuba.
times, it's partsed out, and you eliminate that. So it's every one of these things has failed badly. So that's my opinion of it.
Well, that's a sensible opinion, I think. My own concern it has to do with complexity and what we can, the hubris of thinking that
right.
we predict. People don't appreciate the difference between emergent complex behavior and the problems we solve every day. I've written about this on Ricochet, I'm sure, that we solve easy problems that look hard. We hit Jupiter with a rock, that sort of thing, put things in orbit. Those are easy problems of physics. We built supercomputers, easy problems that have lots of moving parts and are difficult to do, but they're still fundamentally, conceptually physical problems, as opposed to predicting the economy of the United States in the year 2100, which is impossibly complicated. We can't predict the stock market by the close of the week.
Right.
Really, right? Nobody, look at the stock reports. You'll hear the market was down 50 points today on news of, and then they proceed to tell you what caused that drop, but they can't tell you.
They're just making that up.
It's be up or down. So they have the same news available, but they have no idea which way it's going to go until afterwards. They say, "Oh, well, it must be." We don't have a clue what the arable land is going to look like 80 years from now. What the global population will be, even within 2 billion people.
Yeah.
What the U.S. domestic product will be, or if will crash. We can't predict that. So it's insane to impoverish the world today.
Yep.
For some crazy projection based on analysis of complex systems.
Right, and pretty much all the improvements to emissions, pollutants, and so forth have been simply due to regular technological development. Regular technological development has done more and more. I mean, my grandfather's house was heated by coal. My father's house was heated by oil, and if I needed to heat, I live in a paradise here. I don't need to, but if a little natural gas furnace does, it's every step is an improvement, and that's just natural. It just happens.
Right. And it's got to happen everywhere. The U.S. is not the big, well, we're not the big producer of greenhouse gases either, and the rest of the world wants to get wealthy. And
yeah, that's what I say to these people. I'm like, I'll be straight out. Like, I understand you think we can do this stuff, but how are you going to convince China and India? Because they're going to just hear this white guy coming up to them and saying, you need to stay poor because we got rich, but we got rich bad. So
right.
You just live your life poor. And one day if we come up some sort of dilithium crystal, then we'll make you rich like us.
It's a super important point. Super important.
And it's, if we knew for sure that 300 million people were going to die in 80 years because we didn't manage the climate somehow. If we knew that for sure, and we don't, but if we did, then you might make an argument that it's worth impoverishing the third world to do it. Further impoverishing, arresting the development of the third world. But we don't know that. And we have in America, we have no idea what the third world is like, what the developing world is.
Right.
My family is involved in a medical mission in Ghana. That's a really neat story. We should tell on Ricochet sometime. But we have a friend who's a doctor there who, with his wife, is building a clinic and for a chunk of Ghana that has no medical facilities. And they make their own bricks. And these people are out there, I've got video of it, out there barefoot making their own bricks to build a 40-room hospital. And they're shipping medical supplies to Ghana. They can provide basic medical care to people who don't have it. That's what 1 billion people live with. We worry about a 1.5 degree rise that we can't predict based on our lifestyle. People lack perspective on what it costs to try to prevent global warming.
Well, on that sobering note, why don't we come to a conclusion here? We've been talking about an hour. great having you here.
How many topics have we hit?
Oh, we've hit enough of a few of them. I'll have to watch the video and write it down before I do the post. But I'm going to ask you the last question. Who would you like to see us talk to next?
Oh, that's a good question. The Arizona Patriot.
Good. He's someone I've been meaning to do. He actually was possibly going to be my co-host at one point, but couldn't make Ricochet work. But now I know how to do it. So,
Like a terrific guy. And,
so I'll send him a note later. Yeah. So. What was I going to say? Oh, more of a general note. I did manage to get in contact with the Granny dude. He says he wants to do it in a couple months. So we have a small list of people who are like, can't do it now. Like Right Angle, I also talked to her, and she's like, I'm recovering from chemo, and when I'm done with that,
sure.
I'm more than happy to have it sit down. I'm like, okay, good luck. So,
well, thank you guys for putting this together. I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, it's fun to talk to the Ricochet folks.
Mm-hmm.
Edit that as necessary, and I'll see you online.
Yep. Okay. See you guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.